look at all that money, yeah, the money that they spend. Take another look now and take some time for hemp. I don't cut trees for paper, cause it hurts the environment. Stop deforestation, yeah, it's time for hemp. Oh, an acre of hemp makes 20 barrels of oil. No need for pesticides to poison all our soil. People got no food, they got no clothes, they got no rent. Well, right now it's time for hemp.
5 News starts now.
Today, following a phone call with Attorney General Holder, we are confident that we will be able to move forward in the state of Washington with our voter-approved marijuana initiative.
Breaking news this noon hour, the federal government says it will not stand in the way of Washington state's new marijuana laws. Attorney General Eric Holder says recreational pot is not a high priority and the feds won't step in, but there's a catch.
And King Fest Jake Whitberg is live now in the newsroom with the breaking details. Jake?
Morning there, Greg and Mimi. This is a big decision that a lot of people have been waiting for. Finally, some clarity here. The Attorney General, Eric Holder, basically says he will leave Washington State and Colorado alone if the states enforce 8 key enforcement areas. Among those areas just released today, the AG says Washington State must make sure pot doesn't fall in the hands of minors. Revenue from sales of marijuana cannot be funneled to criminal groups. Marijuana purchased in Washington State and Colorado cannot cross state lines, and drug trafficking still illegal. If any of those areas are not strictly enforced, Holder says the Department of Justice will act aggressively, he says, to bring individual prosecutions based on federal law. Now, recreational marijuana was legalized, remember, by voters in November, and both Governor Inslee and State Attorney General Bob Ferguson have been trying to get the feds to clarify their position for months now, even traveling to D.C. to get it. A few minutes ago, the governor said he's very pleased now.
I think that what we've seen is a validation of a reason to believe that we are on the right track of being responsible, being disciplined, being real in figuring out a way to follow the voters' intent in this regard.
Now, there have been hints this could have been coming after President Obama said in December, remember, that the new laws were not a major concern for him. Now the State Department of Licensing is still working through details about how, when, and where licenses will be issued for businesses to start selling, growing, and processing recreational marijuana. At last check, they were aiming for December. We'll have a lot more on this at 5. Live in the newsroom, Jake Wittenberg, King 5 News.
Thank you, Jake.
Thank you for taking time for Hemp. I'm your host, Casper Leach. You are listening to the live broadcast of Time for Hemp all around the world on AmericanFreedomRadio.com and on AM/FM stations all across America. We are concluding today our 2013 Global Hemp Conference, and we have featured so many brilliant minds talking about the very wonderful things that this plant can do, industrial hemp, medical hemp. We've discussed the problems of arrest and incarceration, and now it's time to talk about solutions. Some of the solutions we will address, I'm sure, will have to deal with the international treaties that are in play, and that is something that Michael Crowitz was very nice to talk about. And some of the solutions we'll be talking about what we're going to do to help implement the reintroduction of this plant into an economy because of some of the most exciting news that has happened here recently. And those of you who might not be aware of it, it seems that we might be actually heading up for an end on the war on marijuana. And Eric Holder's comments yesterday were quite amazing, and we're going to be talking about that as well. And we have Ethan Nadelmann on. Ethan, what do you see as a way of bringing forward a solution to the global war on drugs, please?
Well, Casper, I'll tell you, I mean, it's an incredibly exciting time right now. I'm down here in Jamaica, had a remarkable set of meetings in Kingston, Jamaica, the capital, on Wednesday with senior business leaders and top members of the government as well as members of the opposition party. And what you're seeing there is that they are feeling more and more that it's time to move forward in Jamaica with ganja law reform. Not just decriminalization, but also developing the legal market, developing legal tourism, and really using many of the same arguments we're here in the U.S. Now, what I heard from them repeatedly was, what we're worried about is what's the U.S. government going to do? One of them told me a story that when he was a cabinet minister in a past government, and they were just proposing not legalization, but decriminalization, he gets a call from the U.S. ambassador here, and all next thing he knows, he's meeting on conference calls with people in D.C., discouraging him from moving forward in Jamaica. And that's their fear. And what I told them on Wednesday was, you got a lot less to fear now than you think you do. That since Washington and Colorado voted the way they did, and with the White House not responding negatively so far, and with Uruguay moving forward on marijuana legalization and no evidence of pressure from the U.S. government on Uruguay, I said, don't be so concerned. It's time to move forward. Don't be asking permission. Basically appealing to their senses of nationalism around this as well as pragmatism. And they were looking at me, a little unsure, but I got to tell you, the announcement yesterday from the White House, where they basically, sent a message to Colorado and Washington, proceed with caution, but we're willing to let you proceed, where they gave them essentially a green, yellow light to move forward on this stuff. What that means internationally is huge, because the significance of that decision, that announcement, that memorandum from the Justice Department yesterday is significant for Washington, Colorado, because it means they can move forward with implementation of the legalization of marijuana without the same level of worry about capricious federal action. It's significant in other states around the U.S. because people have been holding back and been afraid to introduce bills in legislatures and this and that are now going to say, the feds are saying that they want to see how this works. Let's push forward as well. It's going to be significant for the industry because it means there's a chance now that they'll be able to operate more and more like a real legal industry. But internationally, what it means now is that the State Department is no longer in a position to be telling foreign governments that they cannot consider their own reforms of marijuana laws. Well, how can they, in good conscience or with any credibility, tell a foreign government, we don't want you to legalize or legally regulate marijuana, even if that's in your own best interest, when Washington and Colorado are proceeding and when the Justice Department has indicated a willingness to see how this will work out. So what that means is in countries from Jamaica to Canada, any place where people feel cowed by the United States, what you're going to see is a different level of debate. That old argument that the U.S. will never let us do it ain't going to fly no more.
Well, and on top of that, so many other countries have demonstrated the economic value of having this plant available, not just for medical, but for industrial use, like Canada. Their government even supports the hemp industry, and they're creating, as you know, the hemp auto body. I would think that would be also another major factor coming into play at this point.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, you look, it's not just Canada. There's probably 40 countries that have legalized hemp. And the U.S. is importing, hundreds of millions or billions of dollars worth of hemp products, finished hemp products, but still not allowing it to be grown. But I think the recent shift in politics, not just on marijuana policy reform broadly, but what you saw happening in the U.S. Senate with, Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader in the Senate, agreeing to back a hemp legalization bill, in part because of politics in Kentucky involving his re-election campaign and his desire for the support of Rand Paul. I think what that suggests is there's a decent chance that Congress will actually take action to legalize hemp in the next year or two. And I think that's going to go hand in hand. Remember, at this point, very few countries have felt intimidated about legalizing hemp, except for those in the Caribbean who are traditionally feeling intimidated by the U.S., almost afraid of their own shadow on this stuff. So I think hemp's going to move forward in a big way, but more significantly in a way is that you're going to see a lot more running room for the broader regulation of marijuana, not just for medicinal purposes, but more broadly.
Okay, Ethan, I know Howard also has a question for you, but before he does, my question is, do you think we will see the end of this prohibition completely by the end of this administration?
No, I don't think so. I think by 2016, look for Oregon and Alaska to probably be the next states to move forward with marijuana legalization in 2014. And then expect 2016 to be a big year, from California to Maine to maybe Arizona to Massachusetts. I mean, who knows where it'll be. See, I look forward to having more bills being introduced. But if you look at the intransigence of the Republicans on this issue in the House of Representatives, and if you look at the cowardice of the Democrats and Republicans in the Senate on this issue, and you look at the way that Obama has said pretty clearly, President Obama has more or less said, do not expect me to lead on this issue. I will follow. It's the old FDR line to labor and civil rights leaders, where he said, I understand it, I get it, I'm sympathetic, but make me do it. I'm not going to lead. I will follow. I'll give you some space. So I don't expect it to be 2016. I'm hopeful that this thing can move quickly so that we really get there or close to there by 2020. But remember, we've been in this for a generation. This is, in some respects, a multi-generation battle. The key thing, and my key role in Drug Policy Alliance, is just to keep the ball moving down the field. Avoid the mistakes. Avoid going out of bounds. Avoid letting, commercial interests or mentally ill interests, seize control in a way that undermines our momentum. Learn the lessons from what happened, for example, in Montana on medical marijuana. We got to do this in a smart way, with smart regulation, with smart management of this thing, with smart players, self-policing, and smart regulation of the industry itself. We got to watch out that there's not a big spike in marijuana use among young people or accidents on the road. Washington, Colorado, and Uruguay got to make sure that there's no major increase in exports from their jurisdictions into neighboring ones where it's still illegal. But if we do it right, I think that we will succeed. Okay, guys, take it away. Eric, Howard, Casper, best of luck. Thanks for having me on. Look forward to seeing you guys in Denver at the International Drug Policy Reform Conference.
Former President of Mexico, Vicente Fox, on CNN.
I used a different strategy. President Calderon came with the strategy of bringing in the army and confronting directly criminals. And so we are in the middle of a war. Ciudad Juarez, for instance, has 5,000 army corps right there in the city, and now it's being brought back to peace. But you need to do that most everywhere. So fighting violence with violence is not necessarily the answer. I did use different instruments, and I still think that today we should open the debate on legalization of drugs. I think it should be open and discussed, because when the violence reached its peak in Chicago 100 years ago with the alcohol prohibition, the only answer and solution came by authorizing back again the consumption of alcohol. Now, it doesn't have to be open and just grant drug to everybody, no. You have to be very sure that you take the right measures and you put the right conditions to do that. Right. I'm not sure is the answer, but I would still suggest or propose that debate should be open in the United States and in Mexico.
Well, I was going to ask you, because Secretary Clinton was in Mexico in March and said it is the insatiable demand of the U.S. market for illicit drugs that's really fueling all of this. And you hear this admission, yes, but not that much is being done about it. Yeah, and you're saying that your answer is consider legalizing drugs, marijuana, other drugs?
Well, many different measures. What I'm saying is let's open the debate, because we still have time to take other measures. For instance, yes, that was my cry in front of U.S. authorities, that the responsibility of this nation in the problems of violence in Mexico is total. First, because the huge, large consumer market of drugs is here. Number two, who moves the drug once it crosses the border, who brings it to the Atlanta market, to Washington, and who returns the money laundered back to keep buying drugs in Mexico or in Colombia or in Venezuela, Hugo Chavez. And so it's things that we have to discuss and we have to solve. The problem of arms and weapons coming from this nation, from the United States to Mexico. Those cartels are heavily armed with guns they buy here in this market. So the responsibility of the United States is total in the case of drugs. But we are not here to blame each other. What we have to do is work together.
Education and information. See what all the buzz is all about. It's time for hemp. It's time for hemp.
Thank you for taking time for hemp. I'm your host, Casper Leach. This is the conclusion of the 2013 Global Hemp Summit, sponsored by Time for Hemp. And our moderator is Howard Wooldridge. And Howard, who is our next panelist here on the big broadcast?
Well, we have with us Eric Sterling, the Criminal Justice Policy Foundation, headquartered in the Washington, D.C. area. Eric, if you don't know, has been involved in this now for, a good 30 years, Eric? And in both, in a sense, a bad way and a good way. You were a staffer on the Hill during the 80s. Just tell us a little bit about that, so we have the historical context of where you're coming from.
Well, the context where I'm coming from is that in 1976, I testified for marijuana decriminalization before the Pennsylvania legislature when I was still a law student in my early 20s. Mm-hmm. I joined Normal and ran a Normal chapter out of my law office in Pennsylvania. I was able to get a job working in Washington with the House Judiciary Committee. And when the congressman I worked for retired, I was traded like a baseball player to a new team, a new owner. That was the House Crime Subcommittee. And I became involved in writing federal drug laws and overseeing the Drug Enforcement Administration in the 1980s when Ronald Reagan was president. And so I was at the table during the development of the 1984 Comprehensive Crime Control Act and played a major role in helping Congress write the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986 and 1988. During those days, I would go to Normal conferences, but make sure that I stayed off camera. And then in 1989, started working full-time to help legalize marijuana when I started the Criminal Justice Policy Foundation, and we began to attack the rhetoric and the programs of the first drug czar, Dr. William Bennett, under the first President George Bush. So I've been doing this ever since, helped start the Marijuana Policy Project, been a member of the Drug Policy Alliance since it was created as the Drug Policy Foundation, and helped people like Tom Angel start Marijuana Majority, and you and Jack Cole and Peter Christ start LEAP and other organizations. I'm on the board of Students for Sensible Drug Policy, and all of these efforts all over the country are what resulted in the important victory that we had yesterday.
It certainly has been a long time for many people who've been pushing on this wall to see some real fruits of our labor. This is I would compare this to at least as big as the 1996 first state, California, to pass Prop 215. Would you concur?
Yeah. Yes. This is what you have to understand is that the U.S. Department of Justice is accepting legal marijuana in the United States. U.S. Department of Justice is saying to Colorado and Washington, your legal marijuana programs can go ahead. That is huge because this is contrary to federal law. And the Department of Justice is saying, we can't stop you. We're not going to stop you. What we want you to do is to keep it out of the hands of kids. We want you to prevent intoxicated driving. And we want you to keep your marijuana from flowing into neighboring states. And if you can do that, we're not going to stop you. That is huge. More importantly, you have to recognize the political significance to legislators and activists around the country. In every state, in January, we're going to see bipartisan efforts to introduce legislation to legalize marijuana along the lines of Washington or Colorado. Those bills are not going to necessarily pass, but they're going to get a serious kind of hearing that they haven't gotten before because the Justice Department said, this is okay. We're not going to fight it. We're going to find, activists, circulating petitions in states to get on the ballot in 2014. There's going to be some of those efforts are not going to succeed, but as Ethan Nadelmann said, some of those efforts are definitely going to succeed. Right. And as Ethan tells us, from the capital of Jamaica, where he is right now, governments all over the world, that have been wanting to legalize marijuana now realize the U.S. government is not fighting it in its own territory. It can't fight it in Jamaica, can't fight it in Uruguay. It's not going to fight it in other countries. And this is so incredibly momentous.
Yeah, this is an earthquake event, and no question about it. For our younger audience who didn't know, William Bennett, the first drug czar back, as you said, in 1990-ish, was roundly criticized because he was, in fact, a serious drug addict. He had a three-pack a day cigarette habit, and we learned later that he was a compulsive losing gambler. And he was famous when we talked about saying, excuse me, he was famous when he said, "My personal business is none of your business," which, of course, flies in the face of the entire concept that he wanted to make sure you didn't have your drug of choice, perhaps, but his drug of choice was a personal situation, none of your business. So, well, yeah, so this is a 9.0 on the Richter scale event then, and I know for myself as a full-time advocate on Capitol Hill, the question of where we go forward is well, first, we are going to have to go forward. As you may have said, and Ethan, there's still lots to do. The question now, what type of new strategies do we employ? And I read your blog in the Huffington Post and recommend to the entire audience here. Where do you see the marijuana reform, drug reform going forward at the federal now post the Holder memo?
Well, fortunately, the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Senator Patrick Leahy, a Democrat of Vermont, has scheduled a hearing in early September on this issue of the federal-state relationship.
Right.
And so, out of the box, there's going to become a fairly strong, positive support from the most important committee with jurisdiction over the Department of Justice, the Senate Judiciary Committee. So that this kind of political support from the Congress is going to be very important. What activists need to do is to contact their senators who serve on the Senate Judiciary Committee and say, I applaud what Attorney General Holder has done and what the Obama administration is doing here on legal marijuana, and I want you to express that kind of support at that hearing on September 10th. So it's important for activists to write to their senators, to email them, and to send letters to the editor and to comment, on blogs saying, I support this. We need to, to indicate that this is what the public wants, and we want it to go forward. We need to create the political affirmation that when you take this earth-shaking, groundbreaking kind of step, the public is right behind you and giving you political cover. That's absolutely essential for the audience of Time for Hemp to do that kind of work.
Yeah, I agree. I've just finished 2 months in the Senate. For the audience, I usually spend 2 months in the Senate and 10 months in the House, going door to door, member to member, educating them as to the need to end federal prohibition of drugs, starting with marijuana. And certainly, I've been in every office where the phone rings almost off the hook, and people calling in and giving their opinion. And these staffers do keep a tabulated score of how many people call in, on what issue, and on which side of the issue they're on. And this is tabulated daily and given to the member, so he knows how many calls we received that day, on what issues, and how people felt about it. And they do, on a regular basis, say on the floor of the House or the floor of the Senate, well, I've had so many calls on this issue, and the overwhelming number are saying blank, go this way or go that way. So even if it's your congressman or senator who's a die-in-the-wool prohibitionist, that he always loves prohibition and probably always will, we urge you, call him anyway. It's the call.
No effort is wasted. No effort is ever a waste to contact a public official.
No, but that's true. And we are focusing, though, on a global war on drugs. It's not just here at home. It's here in America, and we have a global audience today that is also stressed by the impact that it is putting upon their part of the world.
And, Casper, so to whatever extent our global audience lives in a democratic society. They should be contacting their delegates and representatives in the chambers of deputies or whatever the name of their parliament or legislature might be to do the same kind of thing. That whether they use social media as the way to express the popular will, these are, it is worthwhile to say, we applaud what the U.S. federal government is doing. Our government should be doing the same thing.
Yeah, I would just read what Ethan said, that it is now essentially impossible for our government to criticize any progress, any moves forward across the planet to end marijuana prohibition, because we have thrown in the towel. We have simply said we are no longer going to enforce federal prohibition in the various states that changed it. And Eric, I want to ask, you read this carefully, and you are also an attorney. Would this Holder memo from yesterday also apply then to the 20 states with medical marijuana here in America?
Oh yes, that's
Sure.
There's a whole paragraph about this, and this is very important because there are some very important positive features compared to the 2009 Ogden Memorandum.
Mm-hmm.
People who follow this closely may remember that back in 2009, when the Obama administration said we're not going to prosecute medical marijuana growers or sellers if they are, quote, in clear and unambiguous compliance. And lawyers said, look, these laws themselves are so ambiguous and unclear, to comply with them is almost impossible on a clear and unambiguous basis.
Mm-hmm.
Now what they have changed is the language is demonstrably in compliance with the state regulatory system. So they've very much have indicated to the 20 states where medical marijuana is now legal that if you've got a strong and effective state regulatory system and you as a grower or dispensary or a doctor are in compliance with that, demonstrably in compliance with that state system, you don't really have to worry about the feds. But they have not, I wouldn't say they've thrown in the towel. The fight is not over. They're holding on to the towel. They've said, in fact, that if state enforcement efforts are not sufficiently robust to protect against the harms that they've identified, the federal government may seek to challenge the regulatory structure itself. They're not saying we give up. They're saying we believe that a well-regulated market is going to protect public safety. That is profound. They are saying a well-regulated market is preferable to prohibition. That is profound. But they're saying if the market is not well-regulated, we'll come in and try to knock it down. And so our challenge, of course, is to make these things work. It means you have to obey the rules.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me just say that for the audience, I was 18 years a street cop near Lansing, Michigan, and in fact, my profession, I'm sure as we speak in both Colorado and Washington, is moving into the post-prohibition phase of what do the police do to ensure compliance with the law. And I'll give you an example right out of my daily life as a professional police officer. Every establishment, every store that sold alcohol in my jurisdiction, we visited once a month. We had a checklist, and we would make sure that the beer was cold and there was no, insects and no rats running around, that the place was clean, that there were not bad people hanging around, just a regular checklist. And then we would send that into the Liquor Control Commission to say that the 7-Eleven at the corner of Bruce and Spruce was in compliance this month. We found no defects, no findings, no judgments. Or if we found something, then we certainly would write that up, and then further action would be taken by the Liquor Control Board. But that's what your police will be doing post-prohibition, is not busting kids for marijuana under the front seat, rather going to the stores where the marijuana starts from and making sure they are in compliance, that they're properly packaging, properly displaying, and properly keeping a good business up there. And that's the new regulatory phase for my profession, law enforcement, moving forward in Colorado and Washington. So,
Howard, there's an important caveat, which is as you see the police pull back, there's going to be an increased responsibility upon parents and teachers and people who work with youth. It may be that the cops aren't looking in the front seat, but parents are going to be looking in the clothing drawers. They're going to be looking in the backpacks. Teachers and school administrators are going to be doing the same thing. And if there becomes substantial leakage of marijuana to youth, this whole thing can collapse. We've got to recognize that following the rules is really important.
Well, now, here's a question I have to put on the table, too, that I think is very important. About a week ago or so, it was pointed out that the Justice Department was encouraging banking systems not to bank with businesses that were doing marijuana-related businesses. And is that going to change? Is this going to open the door to interstate commerce for hemp products in our country, let alone medical marijuana products? And is the IRS going to back off now, do you think? Those three questions together can be put into one part of the plate.
Sure. Casper, excellent questions. An important feature, an important clue to the answer is that in this memorandum that was issued yesterday, the Justice Department said specifically that they're no longer using size or revenues as a proxy for saying a dispensary or an organization is not in compliance with state law. They used to simply say that big organizations were inherently suspect. And they're very, very clear here that size is not an issue. And they're so they're saying, and I'm quoting now, in exercising prosecutorial discretion, prosecutors should not consider the size or commercial nature of a marijuana operation alone as a proxy for assessing whether marijuana trafficking implicates the Justice Department's enforcement priorities. So, it is, the department, at some level recognizes that if dispensaries and retailers do not have access to the banking system, they're going to have to engage in money laundering. They become tied in with the criminal organizations, and it's not in their interest. And I think very quickly we're going to see a change with respect to IRS and the banking laws, because they understand if they want the compliance they're talking about, we're going to have to bring our systems of commerce like banks into partnership with the companies that are doing these businesses.
And then the interstate commerce, we got California, Oregon, and Washington side by side, all have medical marijuana in place. Each might come up with an own strain that might help patients in other states. Is that going to be interstate commerce? And what about the hemp industrial farming? If we do industrial hemp products and create them in Connecticut, can we sell them in Wyoming?
Right now, it would be very, very risky to try to ship this interstate. This memorandum does not answer all the questions. This is groundbreaking, but the full planting has not taken place, and we're not yet ready to start harvest, so to speak. And we've got, we're going to see how this plays out. But right now, interstate trafficking is going to be a very risky business.
Well, let me jump in here on the issue of industrial hemp and interstate commerce. You already have that. We have, as you know, Casper, I'm sure your audience mostly knows, we have hemp coming in from Canada and from China and going across all kinds of state lines to get to a place where it's processed.
We have to remember that cannabis that is psychoactive is going to be treated very differently than hemp.
Exactly. Well, yeah, I'm just saying for industrial hemp, we already have tons of industrial hemp moving across into our ports and ports of entry across Canada and then moving to processing centers all over the country. So that type of interstate commerce with industrial hemp is already well established. Unless,
Casper, here's another, sort of sense about sort of the time frame involved. That the Department of Defense on the question of being in the military and being a gay or lesbian, and don't ask, don't tell. We get the Department of Justice saying we're not going to defend the Defense of Marriage Act, some number of months later. Now the Internal Revenue Service says that legally married same-sex couples are going to be treated, like married couples for federal income tax purposes. The different agencies are going to roll these things out at different rates. And so the banking authorities, the IRS, I think that, these things are going to come, and they don't all come on day one.
You and I are old enough to recall back in the late 70s, we thought we were close to legalization with the Carter administration, the 78, 79, and for a number of reasons, that door was shut and shut hard, and it's only now 30-odd years later it's starting to open up again. So we need to keep that in mind, that we need to keep doing this right and keep doing it as hard as possible.
Well, that was certainly Ethan's point. That was Ethan's point.
Yeah.
I'm on a list of lawyers who discuss developments in the law, and many lawyers yesterday were very critical of this proposal. It didn't go far enough, they said. They want to know, well, does this mean the Justice Department is going to continue to prosecute illegal growers in Colorado and Washington? And there was a certain sense of indignation that illegal growers might be prosecuted. Well, we have to expect that illegal growers are going to be prosecuted, just the way we expect that people who run a moonshine still or who don't pay taxes on the cigarettes that they're selling are going to sort of get away with breaking the law. This is important. This is the government recognizing that the law will regulate marijuana sales and cultivation and use. And that's what we've been working for 40 years. And if we think that now there's going to be no law, well, that's really what prohibition is. It's no law, and the cops chase everybody.
Right.
So, there are people who are going to have, there are people who've been illegal marijuana growers for a long time. They're going to have to figure out how to get into compliance with the law, or figure that they've got a bullseye on their back.
Sure. I remember when I was in California for helping out Prop 19 in 2010, that when I went north of San Francisco into the Emerald Triangle, that my T-shirt of Cops Say Legalize Pot, Ask Me Why, and my horse trailer, which had similar signage, was not greeted with flowers and trumpets. A lot of people, when I pull up at a restaurant, were not appreciating what I was trying to do to legalize, because they had made their living for 20 years selling illegal pot for $4,000 a pound. And legalization, of course, would take that down from 4,000 to maybe 400. So they were not happy with the idea of legalization, and then I believe those 3 northern counties voted against legalization, if for no other reason from economic self-interest. I did want to approach one other topic about this, Eric. The timing. As you know, in Washington, we're kind of, I guess, insiders. The timing of this memo was at the height of discussion about going to war with Syria. And on the news shows today, I watched Joe in the morning for 3 hours, not one word about the Holder decision. Do you think that's significant as far as the timing, or is it that the public just saying this is a snoozer? What are your thoughts?
If you recognize that this memorandum, this announcement, has been hanging around for some time. The Justice Department, knew they had to say something, and last December, the Attorney General said something will be coming soon. To the extent that they want to minimize this announcement for any number of reasons, to the sense that they want to politically minimize the opportunity for Republicans to attack them for being soft on marijuana, this is actually a perfect time for the administration to announce it. When the question of whether or not we're going to commit acts of war against Syria is a big deal. Whether or not the president has the constitutional power to do this or he's going to get authorization from Congress, this is really a big deal. Sending American servicemen into combat, that's a big deal. And so this, it's not, we shouldn't expect the nation's news media to say, let's ignore that because there's this thing involving Colorado and Washington and their marijuana law. It is, it was on page 3 of the Washington Post. It wasn't on page 1.
Do you think that was smart of the administration or being politically savvy?
From their perspective, yes. I mean, obviously we would like to have a lot of discussion about it, but there are many important issues in the world, and this is only one of them.
The federal level, phone calls, emails. I always recommend doing it about twice a year. Just writing in saying, please end the prohibition of these drugs and let the states handle it, pushing a 10th Amendment states' rights issue. Are there any other things that our audience could do on a regular, irregular basis to help move this issue forward at the federal level?
Well, certainly they should do that kind of thing. They should make sure they are members of groups like Norma, the Marijuana Policy Project, LEAP, SSDP, so that they get updates when concerted, organized political action is necessary. Belonging to those organizations makes sure, assures that you get timely action, what to do, the email links, the website links to click so that a powerful voice can be heard when it needs to be proclaimed.
And I know it's very early, and we talked about this just before the program started, but do you see a change of focus or whatever else on Capitol Hill in the United States Congress moving forward in terms of a difference in talking points, a difference in strategies? And this would also go forth across the whole planet, whether you have a parliament or wherever, that what new things are emphasizing old things can we tell our politicians to help them break away from this old prohibition model?
Howard, that's a good question, because from the standpoint of the Democrats, this is very big. Barack Obama is the leader of the Democratic Party. When the president's administration makes this big kind of change, this is a sign to all the Democratic congressmen and Democratic senators, Democratic governors. This is the new line. This is the new party line. This is acceptable. If you line up in favor of marijuana legalization, now you're lining up with Barack Obama and the administration. That's huge. They're not standing out there alone. They're now standing with what is perceived to be the political view of the leading Democrat. This opens up enormous space for members of Congress to talk about this in town hall meetings. They get to say, when they're asked questions, the Justice Department supports this. The Justice Department is going to protect us. Somebody stands up in a town hall meeting and says, well, what about the kids? And the congressman gets to say, the Justice Department's going to protect the kids against diversion because that's what they've promised to do. Well, what about, organized crime? The Justice Department is going to protect us, is what members of Congress can say. And so it changes the way in which public officials are going to talk about this at every level of the government. And that is profound. That's profoundly important. So that it means as they get in the habit of supporting legalization, it means they will be able to vote for bills and explain their votes because they've gotten in the habit of explaining why they support legalization. So this is even though the Republicans aren't there yet, this this changes the nature of the discussion. This is now a legitimate partisan issue in a way that it was not before,
and especially at the state level. And it seems to me that when a politician would hide behind that cover of saying, well, no matter what else, the federal government will come in and hurt Maryland or come in and hurt Iowa if we change our position here in this state, that is no longer valid. That you can't hide behind that argument, correct?
That argument is no longer operable. That argument is history.
Great.
I mean, if you're setting up a well-run regime, if you're setting up a well thought out control system, this is not going to provide a lot of protection for California, because California's systems of control, its own regulatory system, is so poorly conceived. In some sense, this is a very powerful encouragement to the legislature in California and the governor to change the way medical marijuana is being distributed in California. Many medical marijuana states, I think, are going to tighten up their systems so that they feel more comfortable that they're in compliance with this system.
Well, and of course, all to the good. Going forward, there have been some predictions made about what can happen in 2014 in terms of legislation, both for medical marijuana or full-blown go the route of Colorado. Do you see, I'm just curious for a fearless prediction here, in the next, say by the end of 2016, the next presidential election, what would you look for in terms of changes? You're familiar with the states and where they come in line here. What do you think we're going to be looking at in the world when we start January 1st, 2017?
What you're going to find, I think, in the beginning of 2017 with the next president of the United States, the sort of general demographic of the way the country is changing, the sort of general sense about how the Electoral College gives the Democrats a very substantial advantage. In many respects, to the extent that this is an issue of greater importance to younger voters, and that the population of baby boomers, is now beginning to actually die off, the oldest ones, we're going to see that politically this is going to become a much more important issue than it has been in the past, in the sense that it's important to be a supporter of marijuana legalization. I got a call from a veteran state senator in Pennsylvania named Dalen Leach. Senator Leach represents a district in suburban Philadelphia that had been Republican since the Civil War. And he has now, been reelected with almost a 2/3 vote. He'd been in the State House of Representatives as a Democrat before this. And this is the kind of sign how areas that were considered absolutely committed Republican are changing. And he's calling me saying, Eric, I want your support because I'm making legalization of marijuana in Pennsylvania and the United States a central part of my campaign for election to the U.S. Congress. That's huge. This is a guy who's running for a Democratic seat, in suburban Philadelphia. This is not this is not an incumbent. This is a guy who sees the political writing on the wall, who says, if I want to stand out, if I want to win the primary, if I want to win the general election, I'm going to make marijuana legalization front and center of my campaign. That's huge. That tells you where the most sophisticated sort of political analysis is now sort of beginning to gravitate. And this is exactly why the Obama administration took this point. You have to understand the politics of this. This was a big political struggle within the Justice Department. This was not easy for Holder to sort of come up with this. This ultimately was about their assessment of the politics. And they're looking for 2016 to say, this is going to be good for Democrats. And that's why they did it.
Well, on that note, I would encourage our audience, when you do write in and you call in to these offices, these candidates, emphasize that you're 20 years old, you're 22 years old, you're young, and say, all my friends, everybody I know wants to see marijuana legal, regulated, and taxed, treated like alcohol, and to emphasize this generational shift in the political powers moving this way. And Eric, of course, has been around town here for go past 30 years, understands that in the politics of this thing, you're no good as a politician if you don't get reelected. And this is one way to convince your local state senator, state rep, congressman, member of parliament, whatever, that to get on the right side of history, the right side of this issue, would be good politics. And I thank you for that assessment.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else, and kind of, I guess, wrapping this thing up, at the federal level, any closing thoughts, recommendations for our audience? What can they do, acting either locally or globally, to move this issue into the history books, this terrible, terrible prohibition?
Well, after you've joined these organizations to get information so you know what to do, you have to give money. This effort does not run cheaply. It can't all be financed by some very generous, wealthy donors. It has to be supported by the grassroots. You have to support, give money to candidates who take positions that you believe in, like Steve Cohen from Tennessee, or Congressman Polis from Colorado, or Dalen Leach from Pennsylvania. And you've got to give contributions to groups like Citizens Opposing Prohibition, Marijuana Policy Project, LEAP, Students for Sensible Drug Policy, Normal. Money is the mother's milk of politics. These organizations that made sure that Washington and Colorado happened did so based on contributions of people like the listeners to Time for Hemp. I can't stress how important it is. Become a monthly donor to SSDP or LEAP, at $5 or $10 or $15 a month. This is so valuable, and to encourage your friends to do it, or to hold a fundraising party. When you have people get together, at some point when people are talking about this, pass a hat. Ask people to donate, because this is, you may feel awkward, but you're going to feel so proud to know that you are helping to make this happen. Because democracy is not a spectator sport. You're in it. You're in this game. And, until nobody is going to jail for possessing marijuana, until no one is risking getting arrested for marijuana offenses, this is, a really critical matter of your individual liberty. Until everybody who is in prison now for a marijuana offense is freed, we've got a struggle ahead of us.
Thank you, Eric. And I would just say, just in addition to that, or add to it, that, find a politician who agrees with us on this issue and hopefully enough on other issues that you can support them, and then support that politician. Ladies and gentlemen, this gets done by elected officials, and the fact that Barack Obama is in the White House today is the direct result of that is the Holder memo of yesterday, and that's so when you find a politician, help them out, run the phone bank, whatever you can do to help a politician, go door to door, and get the people who believe in what we're trying to do elected. I recall that in Oregon last year or 2 years ago, the marijuana reform folks rallied around the woman who was a candidate for Attorney General, and they did a fantastic job.
Ellen Rosenbaum.
Yeah, and they beat the guy who was all against medical marijuana. Beat him like 2-1. So we do have power in the vote, but we have to be informed, as Eric said, and then get out help out the candidates with both time, money, whatever you got, so that our people are elected. So when I go to Congress on Monday or next year, or whatever, I'm looking at more and more offices that are saying, you know what, we agree with you that it's time to end the federal prohibition of marijuana and the other drugs.
Howard, there are lots of people who are going to listen who say, man, these two guys, they're so naive. Don't they understand the system's all fixed? It's all the rich and the powerful. Well, the reality is when you say, oh, the system's fixed, it's all the rich and powerful, and you're not going to get involved, it's like you've been infected with HIV in a political sense, because we're the immune system of the body politic. And if we say we're not fighting, we're a compromised immune system, and we're not, working to keep the society healthy in a political way. Members of Congress do respond to votes. Yes, they do. And if the voters don't care, then the money counts. But when the voters care, voters will always trump the money.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely. And it does work. I mean, I was out in Colorado last year, and they asked me to go to Colorado Springs. Now, 6 years ago, when Colorado had a vote on legalized marijuana in El Paso County, which is Colorado Springs, which is the home of all your mega churches, it lost 23 to 77%. It was a landslide against legalized marijuana. A fantastic ground game out there. Bob Wiley, Mark Slough, a bunch of folks out there were, from the beginning of Amendment 64, working very, very hard, working all types of media, types of street demonstrations, everything. Misty and I went out there for 10 days, worked the street corners like we always do. And this total effort, at the end of the day, we went from 23 to 77 to El Paso County passed legalized marijuana by 10 votes. In other words, 50-50. So it was the hard work of volunteers and others that moved the needle 27 points in 6 years. That's a lot of hard work, but it can be done. And now the politicians have the problem of every time it gets on the news, well, El Paso County passed Amendment 64, which does have a powerful political message to those who are opposing what we're trying to do, those who love prohibition. So, yeah, people power does count more than money if a politician believes they're going to be unelected.
Howard, Casper, this is about all the time for hemp that I have today.
Well, I want to thank you so much for being part of this special broadcast, this global conference that we are doing. Eric, you are part of our family. You were on the television series back in 1991, and it's just an honor every time to have you on the big broadcast. Thank you to you and Ethan Nadelmann both for being part of Hour 1 of this conference with Howard Wooldridge and myself here on Time for Hemp.
The global war on drugs has failed. That's according to a commission that includes former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan and former U.S. Secretary of State George Shultz. A report released by the Global Commission on Drug Policy on Thursday calls for the legalization of marijuana and other controlled substances. Our principles and recommendations can be summarized as follows. End the criminalization, marginalization, and stigmatization of people who use drugs but who do no harm to others. The Commission is especially critical of the anti-drug policies applied by the United States, saying the U.S. government should adopt policies rooted in health care and human rights rather than anti-crime approaches. The Commission says the global scale of illegal drug markets has grown dramatically over the last decade, but the U.S. argues the war on drugs has been effective domestically.
The United Nations will release a report today showing that the use of opiates, cocaine, and marijuana from 1998 to 2008 has increased substantially. The panel recommends making drugs legal and offer treatment services for users. The White House says drug use in the U.S. is down, with cocaine use declining almost 50% in the past 5 years.
The United States government has rejected the findings as misguided.
The U.S. has taken a really hard line when it comes to drugs, and essentially their argument is it would be a huge mistake to legalize drugs because in the end more people would use it, the argument goes, and it would actually create a much more harmful situation. They say too that the focus really needs to be on reducing demand. There are numbers out there to prove that when it's done effectively, they can do it properly and successfully, but legalizing drugs for now for the U.S., no way, Jose.
Bruce Bagley, expert on drug trafficking in Latin America at the University of Miami, compared U.S. efforts to a massive game of whack-a-mole in which drug supplies, drug violence, and crime are shuffled from one country to the other. In the U.S., there is little or nothing to show for it except for the warehousing of some 600,000 people a year on drug-related offenses in prison at huge costs. The Commission's recommendations were a good start, but unlikely to be implemented given political and public resistance to such ideas in the U.S. A blogger for The Telegraph said, according to the evidence presented in the report, regulation of drugs is better than prohibition. Generally, in a liberal democracy, you need a reason to make things illegal, not a reason to legalize them. There is, it seems, no good reason not to take a long, hard look at our drug policy, at what really works, not what is merely politically expedient. The 19-member commission also included former U.S. Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker, the former presidents of Mexico, Brazil, and Colombia, writers Carlos Fuentes and Maria Vargas Llosa, and British business mogul Richard Branson.
Time for Hemp is an educational tool that can be found in iTunes, on Spreaker, and of course at timeforhemp.com.